Kemerovo Oblast lies deep in southwestern Siberia, a region shaped by coal, frost, and routine. Towns here were not built for beauty, they were built to function. Rows of concrete apartment blocks followed the logic of the mines beneath them. Everything existed for work, and work existed for survival. In the early 2000s, the settlement of Yasnaya Polyana sat on the edge of one such mining corridor. Officially, it was classified as an urban-type settlement, though most residents still referred to it as a village. One main road divided the town in two. To the north were the apartment buildings assigned to mine workers. To the south, older wooden houses leaned slightly inward, their frames warped by decades of winter and neglect. The mine dictated the rhythm of life. Shifts changed at 6 a.m., 2 p.m., and 10 p.m. Sirens marked time more accurately than clocks. People learned not to ask questions. Accidents happened underground. Above ground, people stayed quiet. At the far end of Lenina Street, beyond the bus stop that no longer displayed schedules, stood house number 17. It was a detached two-story structure built in the late Soviet period. Gray brick, fenced yard, no visible ornamentation. The property belonged to the Morozov family. Official records listed 6 permanent residents at that address, 3 generations under one roof. Viktor Morozov, age 58, senior mining foreman. Galina Morozova, age 56, cafeteria supervisor at mine number 12. Sergei Morozov, age 34, electrician. Irina Morozova, age 32, part-time accountant. 2 children, both under 10. They were considered stable, reliable, known. Neighbors described them as quiet but not withdrawn. Victor left early for work and returned at the same hour every evening. Galina tended the garden in summer. Sergei repaired electrical faults for other families. The children attended the local school. There were no complaints on record, no police visits, no disturbances. House number 17 was not a place people talked about. On October 14th, temperatures dropped suddenly. The first ice formed along the edges of puddles. Winter announced itself early that year. By dusk, Lenina Street was nearly empty. A light snow began to fall, just enough to mute footsteps. At 8:47 p.m., the Morozov household received visitors. According to later reconstruction, the first to arrive was Mikhail Karpov, age 41, a former miner, dismissed 2 years earlier after a tunnel collapse that left him partially disabled. He had once worked under Victor's supervision. The 2 men shared a history that was never formally documented. Karpov was followed, separately, by Natalia Sidorova, age 29, a schoolteacher from a neighboring settlement. She was acquainted with Irina Morozova through bookkeeping work related to a local cooperative. Her presence that night would later raise questions no one could immediately answer. Between 9 and 10:30 p.m., 7 more people entered the Morozov residence. Some arrived by foot, 1 by private car, 2 were known to the family, others were not. No neighbor reported unusual noise, no shouting, no gunshots. The mine siren sounded at 10 p.m. as it always did, marking the night shift. Windows along Lenina Street went dark, one by one. What happened inside house number 17 unfolded in silence. The next morning, smoke was seen rising from the backyard burn pit. This was not unusual. Residents often burned trash to save on disposal fees. But by midday, the smoke had not stopped. At 1:13 p.m., a delivery driver noticed the front door slightly open. By 1:40 p.m., local police were on site. They would later confirm that 9 people were dead inside the house. None had attempted to leave. No emergency calls had been made. And the Morozov family was at the center of it all. The first officer to enter house number 17 noted the temperature immediately. The heating system was still running. Radiators were warm. The house had not been abandoned in haste. The front hallway showed no signs of forced entry. Shoes were aligned near the wall. coats hung on their hooks. A miner's jacket, still dusted with coal residue, had been placed carefully on a chair. The bodies were discovered in stages. In the living room, 2 adults lay seated on the sofa, Viktor Morozov and Mikhail Karpov. Their postures suggested they had been sitting when they died. No defensive wounds were visible. Both had sustained severe cranial trauma caused by a blunt object. The television was off. A chessboard rested on the coffee table, pieces mid-game. In the adjoining kitchen, Galina Morozova was found on the floor near the sink, a single wound to the back of the head. Investigators would later determine she had been attacked from behind while washing dishes. The water had continued running until it flooded the linoleum, seeping under the baseboards. Upstairs, the pattern changed. In the larger bedroom, Sergei Morozov and Natalia Sidorova were discovered together. The room showed signs of a struggle. A lamp lay shattered. Blood spatter reached the wardrobe doors. Sergei's injuries were extensive, defensive wounds visible on both arms. Natalia had sustained multiple blows. Her purse was found untouched at the foot of the bed. In the children's room, both minors were found in their beds. They had not left their blankets. The final bodies were located in the basement. The Morozovs used the basement as a storage space. Shelving lined the walls, preserved vegetables, tools, old mining equipment. It was here that investigators found Irina Morozova and 2 unidentified adult males. The men were later identified as Oleg Markin, age 38, and Denis Lebedev, age 27. Neither lived in Yasnaya Polyana. Both had criminal records related to theft and informal debt collection. Their presence inside the Morozov home was not explained by any prior connection on record. All 3 showed signs of prolonged violence. The official time of death for all 9 victims was estimated between 9:30 p.m. and 11:15 p.m. The lack of noise reports suggested the attacks occurred sequentially, not simultaneously, one room at a time, controlled, methodical. The murder weapon was recovered in the basement, a coal hammer, standard issue at mine number 12. Viktor Morozov's fingerprints were present on the handle. This detail would shape the entire investigation. There was no sign of robbery. Cash was found in wallets. Jewelry remained untouched. Doors and windows were locked from the inside. Snow outside showed no foreign footprints beyond those already catalogued entering the house earlier that evening. By nightfall, the settlement was sealed. News read quietly through phone calls and brief conversations in stairwells. Parents kept children home. Workers avoided eye contact at the mine. The question circulating among investigators was not who had entered the house. It was who decided no one would leave.
By the second day, the investigation shifted from documentation to reconstruction. Forensic teams worked without interruption. Every surface inside house number 17 was photographed, measured, and catalogued. Blood patterns suggested movement between rooms, not escape, but direction. Someone had guided the sequence. The coal hammer showed impact residue consistent with all major injuries. However, the angle and force varied. Some blows were precise, others showed hesitation. The key inconsistency was Viktor Morozov himself. His fingerprints were present on the weapon, yet his injuries suggested he was struck early. There was no blood transfer on his hands, no signs he had fought or pursued anyone. Investigators concluded his contact with the hammer occurred before the violence escalated, a voluntary action. Attention turned to the basement. The basement floor showed the highest concentration of blood. Drag marks indicated at least one body had been moved after death. The shelving unit nearest the boiler had been disturbed. Behind it, investigators discovered a metal lockbox welded into the concrete wall. Inside were documents, mine safety reports, handwritten logs, photocopies of injury claims. Names appeared repeatedly: dates crossed out and rewritten. Several documents referenced a tunnel collapse in 1999, officially recorded as equipment failure. 3 of the 9 victims had been present at that incident. The collapse had killed 4 miners. Compensation was paid to their families. The case was closed within weeks. One miner's name was missing from the official list, Mikhail Karpov. Records showed he had been underground during the collapse but had exited the shaft before the incident was reported. His injury claim was denied. He was dismissed months later under vague circumstances. Interviews with former mine workers revealed unspoken rules. Foremen controlled assignments, overtime, safety reports. Complaints could end careers. Viktor Morozov's signature appeared on multiple internal documents connected to the collapse. Investigators could not determine whether the lockbox was known to others. Dust patterns suggested it had been opened recently. Phone records showed multiple calls between Sergei Morozov and Denis Lebedev in the weeks leading up to October 14th. The nature of those calls remained unclear. No messages were recovered. Neighbors were interviewed. Most described the Morozovs as private. One neighbor recalled a heated argument outside the house 3 nights before the murders. Voices were low, controlled, no shouting. The figures were not clearly seen. Another reported seeing a car parked near house number 17 on the night of the killings, engine running, headlights off. What became increasingly evident was that the gathering that night was not accidental. The Morozov home had become a meeting place. Whether it was meant to resolve something or conceal it was still unknown. By the end of the week, investigators issued no public suspect profile. Instead, the official statement referred to the case as a domestic incident involving extended acquaintances. The settlement accepted the wording. Silence returned to Lenina Street. As the investigation progressed, attention moved away from the crime scene and into the past. Financial records were examined first. The Morozov household showed no signs of distress. Salaries were modest but stable. No large debts. No recent loans. However, Irina Morozova's accounting work revealed irregular transactions linked to a small private subcontractor operating near mine number 12. The company existed on paper only. Payments had been routed through informal agreements listed as safety consultations. In reality, the funds were used to compensate injured miners whose cases never reached official review. Quiet payments. No paperwork filed with regional authorities. Several names tied to those payments matched individuals connected to the 1999 tunnel collapse, including Oleg Markin. Markin had acted as an intermediary. He connected dismissed miners with families willing to accept compensation outside the legal framework. In exchange, silence was maintained. No complaints, no appeals. Investigators believed that house number 17 had become a node in that system. Interviews with former miners confirmed the pattern. Meetings often took place in private homes, never in public offices. Foremen were indirectly involved. Families handled money. Everyone benefited until someone stopped benefiting. The night of October 14th was reconstructed minute by minute. According to forensic estimates, Viktor Morozov met Mikhail Karpov first. The chessboard suggested familiarity, a ritual. Their conversation likely began calmly. The coal hammer, later used as the murder weapon, was already present in the living room, resting near the fireplace. Investigators theorized Viktor retrieved it himself. Galina Morozova's position in the kitchen indicated she was unaware of what was unfolding. Her death occurred early, possibly to prevent intervention. Upstairs, the struggle between Sergei Morozov and the others suggested disagreement. Phone records indicated Sergei had arranged the meeting with Lebedev and Markin. What was promised to them was never delivered. Natalia Sidorova's involvement remained unclear. Her name appeared only once in the documents, attached to a minor clerical correction made years earlier. She may have come to retrieve information or to warn someone. In the basement, the violence escalated. Blood analysis showed at least 2 people were alive when brought downstairs. The confined space amplified sound, yet no neighbor reported hearing anything. The mine siren at 10 p.m. coincided with the most violent interval. Noise would have blended into routine. The fire pit outside contained partially burned documents. Some matched copies from the lockbox, others could not be identified. The burning occurred after all victims were deceased. This detail altered the classification of the case. What began as a domestic incident now showed signs of deliberate evidence destruction. Despite this, no arrests were made. By mid-November, the regional prosecutor's office took control. Files were reassigned. Investigators were instructed to limit interviews. Families of the victims received brief notices. The Morozov house was sealed. Snow covered the yard. Footprints disappeared. Windows remained dark. Inside, the heating system was shut off for the first time in years.
Winter settled fully over Yasnaya Polyana by December. Temperatures dropped below -30. Pipes froze. Roads narrowed. The settlement became inward-looking, as it did every year. What had happened inside house number 17 faded from daily conversation, replaced by routine and necessity. Officially, the case remained open. Unofficially, it stalled. The regional prosecutor's review produced no indictments. The final internal classification described the event as a collective violent incident with mutual participation, a term that assigned responsibility everywhere and nowhere at once. The coal hammer was logged into evidence storage. The lockbox documents were copied, then returned to the wall. No further forensic analysis was ordered on the burned papers. Phone data older than 6 months was declared irretrievable. In January, mine number 12 announced a temporary restructuring. 2 foremen retired early. 1 administrative office was closed. No explanation was given. Former investigators later stated that pressure did not come in the form of threats. It came as guidance. Meetings were short. Questions were redirected. Certain lines of inquiry were described as unproductive. The Morozov children were buried in the local cemetery, separate from the adults. Attendance was limited. Snow covered the graves within hours. House number 17 remained unoccupied. By spring, the fence began to lean. The burn pit filled with rainwater. Weeds emerged through cracks in the yard. The house was not sold. No municipal plans were filed for demolition. Occasionally, people noticed the lights inside flicker on at night. Utility records showed no registered usage. Some claimed it was wiring fault. Others suggested someone was checking the property. No one reported it formally. Years later, when journalists requested access to the case file, they received a partial archive. Several pages were missing. Names were redacted. The lockbox was not mentioned. The official conclusion remained unchanged. 9 people died on October 14th. No one was held accountable. And in Yasnaya Polyana, the mine sirens continued to sound on schedule, marking time in a settlement that had learned, once again, that certain events were not meant to be explained. In the years that followed, Yasnaya Polyana changed slowly, almost imperceptibly. New families moved into the apartment blocks near the mine.
Older residents passed away or relocated to live with relatives in larger cities. Lenina Street was repaved. The bus stop received a new schedule board. Life reorganized itself around absence. House number 17 remained outside that process. Municipal records listed it as temporarily restricted property, a designation that required periodic inspection. In practice, inspections were brief: photographs of the exterior, notes stating structure intact. No one entered the building. Inside, furniture remained in place. Investigators who reviewed the file later noted that personal items had never been catalogued for removal. Children's notebooks lay in a desk drawer upstairs. Winter coats hung in the hallway, untouched. The heating system was never reactivated. By the third winter, frost damage spread along the interior walls. Plaster cracked. Water pipes burst and froze again. Still, the doors stayed locked. In 2011, a former mine electrician submitted a written statement to the regional archives. He claimed that, in the weeks before the murders, Viktor Morozov had requested after-hours access to Mine No. 12's storage facility, specifically to retrieve outdated safety equipment scheduled for disposal. Among the items listed was a coal hammer. The statement was acknowledged. No follow-up was recorded. Around the same time, a former investigator privately noted discrepancies in the autopsy timelines. Certain injuries suggested that at least one victim had been alive later than officially stated. This observation never appeared in the final documentation. Files related to the 1999 tunnel collapse were reclassified under a different case number. Access required special authorization. By then, Mikhail Karpov's name appeared nowhere in the mine's active history. People who had known the Morozov family spoke less frequently about them. When they did, details were vague. The story simplified itself. A bad night, a family dispute, outsiders involved. Complex explanations dissolved. What remained was the understanding that House No. 17 was a place where boundaries had collapsed between work and home, authority and silence, responsibility and erasure. No memorial was erected. No public hearing was held. The tragedy existed only in records, incomplete and compartmentalized. And in the town shaped by coal and routine, that was enough. In 2016, a routine audit of archived criminal cases in Kemerovo Oblast flagged the Morozov file for review. The reason was procedural. The case had never been formally closed. An internal memo noted unresolved inconsistencies, unidentified motivations, missing documentation, and the absence of a prosecutorial resolution. A junior legal analyst was assigned to assemble a summary for potential administrative closure. What the analyst found was not new evidence, but gaps. Entire interview transcripts were referenced but not included. Photographic logs skipped numerical sequences. The evidence inventory listed items that no longer appeared in storage. Among them were fragments recovered from the burn pit behind House No. 17. When inquiries were made, the response was administrative confusion. Storage facilities had been reorganized, evidence had been transferred, some materials were reportedly destroyed following statutory retention limits. The analyst requested access to Mine No. 12's internal safety archive. The request was denied. Instead, a brief addendum was issued, reaffirming the original classification of the case. The language was unchanged. Responsibility remained diffuse. The recommendation was to finalize the file.
Before the closure was processed, the analyst interviewed 2 retired police officers who had been first responders in 2003. Both recalled the same detail without prompting. The house had been quiet, not only during the night of the killings, but afterward. No radio, no television hum, no domestic noise. Even the children's room felt undisturbed, as if routine had continued until it stopped. One officer described the scene as prepared. This observation did not enter the official record. Later that year, house number 17 was quietly removed from the restricted property list. The designation expired without renewal. Ownership reverted to municipal control. No public notice was issued. Within months, contractors were seen on Lenina Street. By autumn, the house was gone. The lot was leveled. The foundation was filled. Grass seed was spread unevenly over fresh soil. No marker identified what had stood there before. Today, nothing distinguishes that patch of ground from the rest of the settlement. Buses still stop nearby. Children walk past it on their way to school. The mine siren still sounds, dividing days into shifts. The Kemerovo tragedy exists only in fragments, distributed across offices, memories, and omissions. 9 people entered house number 17 on October 14th. None of them left.
Without a structure, there was no site to revisit. Without active relatives pressing for answers, there was no pressure to reopen inquiries. Administrative closure followed naturally, signed and filed without announcement. The mine expanded its operations in the following years. New safety protocols were introduced. Updated reporting systems replaced handwritten logs. Publicly, the past was addressed as progress. Privately, certain names were never spoken. Residents who had lived on Lenina Street during that period described a subtle shift after the house disappeared. Not fear, not guilt. A recalibration. People learned which conversations ended quickly and which never began. The Morozov family photographs were not returned to anyone. They remained sealed in municipal storage until the retention period expired. After that, no record confirms what was done with them. Natalia Sidorova's school reassigned her classroom. Students were told she had moved. Her name appears on no local memorials. Denis Lebyadev and Oleg Markin were listed as deceased in separate registries. No cause was publicly associated with their deaths. As for Viktor Morozov, his employment file at mine number 12 remains incomplete. The final evaluation page is missing. His personnel number was later reassigned. This was not unusual. In settlements like Yasnaya Polyana, history does not disappear all at once. It thins, it breaks into pieces. It survives only where it is not examined directly. The ground where house number 17 once stood freezes every winter and softens every spring. Nothing grows there differently. Nothing marks it as significant. And that, according to the official record, is how the case ended.
There is one final document attached to the archive. It is not evidence. It is not testimony. It is a maintenance report filed 3 months after the demolition. The report concerns underground utility lines beneath Lenina Street. During routine checks, workers noted an anomaly near the former location of house number 17. A section of older piping, predating the house itself, ran beneath the lot. It had once connected to an auxiliary coal ventilation shaft, sealed decades earlier. The shaft was not reopened. The report recommended no action. What mattered to investigators who later reviewed the file was the date the shaft had been sealed, the same year as the tunnel collapse. The implication was not explored. There was no indication the Morozov family had accessed the shaft or even known of its existence. But the coincidence remained, unaddressed and unexplained, like many other elements in the case. In settlements built around extraction, the ground holds more than foundations. It holds roots, shortcuts, records that never reached paper. What happens below does not always surface cleanly above. The Kemerovo tragedy was never assigned a motive because motives require clarity. This case offered only alignment of people, history, and unspoken agreements converging in one house on one night. 9 deaths were documented. The sequence was reconstructed. The responsibility was never fixed. And in the final archive index, the case is listed under a neutral category. Resolved by administrative conclusion. No further review scheduled. Years later, when former residents of Yasnaya Polyana were interviewed for unrelated regional studies, the Morozov case surfaced only indirectly. When asked about changes in the settlement, some mentioned the demolition on Lenina Street. Others recalled a period when police vehicles were present more frequently. No one referenced names unless prompted. Memory had adjusted itself to absence. One retired miner described Viktor Morozov as a man who knew how things really worked. He offered no elaboration. Another recalled Galina Morozova's habit of keeping detailed household records, noting dates and figures in small notebooks. Those notebooks were never logged into evidence. In regional crime statistics, the incident appears as an anomaly. A brief spike in fatalities with no corresponding judicial process. Analysts noted it, then moved on. What remained consistent across all accounts was the same structural observation. The violence did not rupture the settlement, it sealed something inside it. The Morozov house had functioned as a private extension of public systems. Mine administration, informal compensation, unrecorded negotiation. When that space collapsed, the systems adjusted, redistributed, and continued. No one replaced house number 17. The lot remains empty. In winter, snow settles there first. In summer, grass grows thinner. Passers-by rarely notice. The case file rests in a regional archive, accessible only by request. Its pages uneven, its margins marked by omissions rather than conclusions. 9 people were killed on a single night in Kemerovo Oblast. The investigation recorded how. It never recorded why. And in places built on extraction, where silence is functional and continuity is valued, that distinction is often considered sufficient. It ends with routine. A checklist, a stamp, a signature dated months after the last review. The paper authorizes the transfer of remaining materials to long-term storage, no exceptions noted. Among those materials are environmental reports from Lenina Street, soil samples taken after demolition. The results indicate elevated traces of coal dust and industrial residue, consistent with the surrounding area. Nothing abnormal, no recommendation for further testing. The report is technical, impersonal, and brief. In the margins, an archivist has written a pencil note, site cleared. The Morozov name does not appear again. Mine number 12 continues operations under a different administrative structure. Safety briefings reference updated protocols. The 1999 collapse is cited once as a historical benchmark for reforms. Individual accountability is not discussed. Yasnaya Polyana remains on regional maps. Population figures fluctuate slightly. The bus still stops near where house number 17 once stood, though the stop has been renamed. No plaque marks the change. For investigators who handled the case early on, the memory persists without resolution. They recall details without sequence. A chessboard, a running tap, a basement light left on. These fragments exist outside official language. The file, however, is complete. It states that on the night of October 14th, 9 people died in a private residence. It states that the event was contained. It states that no further action is required. In places built to endure routine, documentation often outlives understanding. What cannot be organized into process is allowed to disappear. And so the Kemerovo tragedy remains where it was placed, between records and ground, between what was known and what was permitted to be recorded.
The final reference to the case appears not in a criminal register, but in a municipal planning ledger. The entry is brief, a line item approving the redistribution of land parcels along Lenina Street. Measurements, boundaries, soil classification. The empty lot is assigned a neutral designation, suitable for future development if required. No timeline is attached. No remarks accompany the entry. For all administrative purposes, the space is treated as unused ground that once held a structure, nothing more. Those who walk past it today do not slow their steps. There is no reason to. The settlement offers no visible reminder of what occurred. The absence has been normalized, absorbed into the landscape like an old scar beneath clothing. In official language, the case no longer exists as an active subject. It survives only as a reference number, cited occasionally in audits or footnotes, never revisited in full. 9 deaths remain recorded. The method is documented. The setting is described. But the center of the event, the decision that night, the moment when resolution turned into containment, was never isolated. And so the Kemerova tragedy concludes not with accountability, but with quiet continuity. A house removed, a file closed, a settlement that learned how to proceed without answers. There are no witnesses left to question. Those who entered house number 17 that night are all accounted for in death certificates. Those who investigated the case have retired, relocated, or passed away. Their notes, where they existed, were folded into official summaries. What remains is procedural memory, a system that records outcomes, not intentions. A settlement that recognizes disruption and responds by restoring balance. The disappearance of a house was not an ending, but an adjustment. In later years, children playing near Lenina Street asked what used to be there. Adults answered vaguely, an old building, nothing important. The explanation was accepted. The mine continues to operate beneath the ground. New tunnels follow mapped routes. Old shafts remain sealed. The past exists below, stable and inaccessible. No one claims responsibility for the events of October 14th. No confession was ever recorded. No trial assigned meaning to the sequence of actions. The Kemerovo tragedy was absorbed into routine, processed until it lost definition. It did not become a lesson, it became background. And that is how the record leaves it. 9 people died in a single house on a single night. The place no longer exists. The explanation was never required. In the Regional Statistical Yearbook, the incident is reduced to a number. 1 entry among thousands, no narrative attached, no cross-reference to labor disputes, historical incidents, or administrative restructuring. The yearbook is designed to show stability over time, not rupture. For outside observers, the Kemerovo Oblast presents as orderly. Production figures, employment rates, infrastructure investments. The surface tells a coherent story. What happened in Yasnaya Polyana does not contradict that story. It fits within it. The violence was contained. The people involved were limited. The effects did not spread. From an institutional perspective, the matter was resolved. There is no indication that House Number 17 influenced policy or public discussion. No new regulations were named after the event. No inquiries expanded beyond its perimeter. This absence of consequence is not recorded as failure. It is recorded as efficiency. The system identified a disruption, isolated it, and returned to function. The documentation reflects this outcome precisely.
What the documents do not capture is the silence that followed. Not the silence of grief or shock, but the practiced silence of familiarity, the kind that forms when boundaries are understood without being stated. In Yasnaya Polyana, people learned again where those boundaries were.